Donna and the other team at Rural Housing Scotland for letting SEDA Land organise this starting event as part of the Rural Housing Scotland Conference 2024. So this is the fourth in a series of events, of conversations about sustainable placemaking in rural Scotland and what can be done to help to reverse the declining populations and the quite catastrophic projected depopulation problems in different parts of rural Scotland. The recordings of the first three parts of this conversation are available online. Earlier conversations focused on the role of local authorities and also on local communities. But this afternoon's conversation now hands the baton over to the Scottish Government in terms of what the government can do to speed up the creation and support for sustainable rural communities. We're going to be looking back at some of the obstacles identified in the previous conversations, but most importantly, we're looking forward at solutions and opportunities. We've challenged all of our panelists to be positive, passionate, and provocative. This event is being sponsored by the Scottish Government, and the key findings will be fed into ongoing conversations they are having. We expect it to be picked up as part of the implementation of the Rural and Islands Housing Action Plan. And of course, we've just got the newly published action plan to address depopulation. There's the ongoing implementation of MPF4 and other upcoming bills, and new pieces of legislation, such as the Community Wealth Building Bill and the Land Reform Bill. My name is Megan McInnes. I'm going to be your chair for this afternoon. I grew up on the Isle of Skye and I now live in Applecross, where I'm the local development manager for the Applecross Community Company. We are trying to deliver affordable houses for our own community, so these issues are all very much close to my heart. So the format of the conversation this afternoon is going to be familiar to those of you who have watched previous SEDA Land events. We're going to have interventions from our 6 panelists, and then we're going to have a short panel discussion before we open it up to a conversation with all of you in the room and also online. And my colleague Kirsten here at the front is going to be helping passing questions from those online into the room here. And between these sections, we'll have interludes from 2 artists who are passionate themselves about the sense of place and living in rural Scotland. We've got Chris Pawichi, who will be joining us online, and Motte Parrott, who's going to be in the room with us. And they've been commissioned specifically to write pieces for this afternoon's event. Now, before I start, I'm afraid I have a few housekeeping things just to pass on. So for those of you in the room, can you have your phones on silent? And for those of you joining online, can you make sure your microphones are muted? There's no scheduled fire alarms this afternoon, so if the fire alarm does go off, can you go out through those doors and follow the exits downstairs? The event is going to be recorded, and it will be posted on the SEDA Land website shortly. When it comes to the question and answer sessions, if you can please try and keep your questions short. For those of you online, please use the chat function like you normally do with the SEDA Land events, and Kirsten will be passing them to those of us in the room. Please also use the chat function like you normally do for online events in terms of networking and connecting to folk, but please also remember, like previously, that the transcripts from that chat is saved and is seen by the organisers. And then if you're tweeting about this, please use the hashtag #BeFutures4 and of course the RHS Conference 2024 hashtags as well. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to our first panellist, who is Morven Fancy, who's the Head of Skills and Population at HIE.
Thanks very much, Megan. Thanks everyone for being here today as well. So I'm coming in with a sort of overarching piece here in relation to the economy, the depopulation challenges that are faced in Highlands and Islands, and how this all connects into the serious requirement for rural housing. As some of you may know, Highlands Islands Enterprise is not a housing agency by any means, but we find ourselves faced with the reality of our economy being potentially stymied across the Highlands and Islands, particularly the rural parts of the Highlands and Islands, because of the lack of housing. So it's difficult to stand on the sidelines when we're facing that particular picture in the region. I think what we're also aware of and what we can see, and perhaps we need to do more in terms of promoting it, is the sheer scale of the unprecedented economic opportunity that's facing the Highlands and Islands right now. It's absolutely overwhelming when you sit and speak to energy transmission providers who are talking about 5,000 jobs here and there. We're talking to renewables projects where there's hundreds and thousands of jobs coming at us. We're talking to nature-based organisations where peatland restoration and forestry work is jobs in rural areas. And in every conversation that we're having with them in terms of the inward investment opportunities and the work, we're seeing serious problems about housing and being able to attract people and keep people and retain people in communities. So it's difficult for us to be able to stand back from that. We have to respond and make sure that after 60 years of being in existence as a development agency creating jobs, that the lack of housing is going to get in the way of us being able to actually grow the economy going forward at this particular pivotal moment. In terms of the depopulation, hopefully most of you will have seen the launch of the government's depopulation plan on Friday, which is really welcomed. In as much as after the population strategy was launched in April 21, we saw the recognition of depopulation at a higher level across government, and we also recognised the importance of the balance of the population. So I guess partly what I'm involved in is trying to understand how we ensure that we connect up the economic opportunity coming at us, the depopulation that we're facing in places where we know there are jobs now and there will be more jobs coming forward, and ensuring that the houses can end up being built in those places. And we know that we're leaning heavily into community groups in particular in these rural areas to deliver these. On the slide, it's just really a sort of a few things to focus the mind. I mean, the heading, for instance, sustainable communities need places for people to live. Well, of course they do, but sometimes I feel as if we need to keep telling people that, because ultimately it gets forgotten about when in the depopulation discussion. And the item there I've mentioned about moving away from market-driven by private profit for land is just one example of the many, I think in the last year, hundreds of things I'm hearing. This is what we need to do. That's what we need to do. No, that's not right. We need to do this over here. And it's a very distracting situation when we have so many issues faced with delivering rural housing. It's very difficult to know actually how do you make your way through that to make the right decisions, to do the right things at the right time, and that's partly what we're trying to inform. I guess what I'm also saying is that in all these conversations and all the different players involved in the housing system, which is challenging, very challenging to actually deliver, particularly in rural areas. I think what I'm proposing is that we need a proactive leadership. We're needing a much more concerted effort. There's some really, really good examples of partnership working. We're seeing it in places, but often that partnership working is just still not managing to get housing projects across the line because of the challenges within the finance system or the regulations that we want to do to deliver these houses. So my plea really is, how do we better connect housing, depopulation and economy, particularly at a government level, where we're having lots of conversations with a housing part of government, but not necessarily with an economy. So how do we ensure that the join up happens there, so that the recognition of this economic opportunity that's facing us right now filters across different parts of government, and it's not just government, it's the private sector, getting information out there so that everybody knows that that demand currently is there for housing and is only going to grow significantly over the coming years. And I think my final comment really, which feels a bit glib, but I have been involved in lots of research projects and studies and discussions, etc. And part of me thinks we've got a remote and rural housing action plan, we've got a depopulation action plan as well. You know, we kind of know what a lot of the problems are, so can we not just actually get on and deal with them and address them? And that's easy for me to say, and I know how complicated this is, so I don't mean it like, I don't say it lightly. So maybe I'll just leave it at that, Megan, if that's okay.
Thanks, Morven. I mean, I think that's a great call to action, firstly, and secondly, it's really good way of starting off this conversation, sort of locating the importance of affordable housing in rural areas within the broader context and connections between both the importance of building a sustainable rural economy and net zero ambitions and all the other things we're trying to achieve. So thank you very much. So our next panelist is Helen MacDonald, who's from the Mull and Iona Community Trust. Over to you.
Thank you. So I'm coming very much from the community perspective, and my slide really just illustrates what can be achieved by community group and the impact of very small scale housing delivery in a fragile community. And at MICT, we're really keen to do a lot more. We've got lots of really exciting housing projects that we'd like to take forward. And the main stumbling block is funding or lack of access to. So that's kind of my main point, and I've sort of broken that down into three main sections. And the first is targets. So we've got the Rural and Islands Housing Action Plan, we've got the new depopulation plan, and they still have a target of only 10% of all new affordable housing delivery being in rural and island communities. And it was interesting in the depopulation action plan that housing is mentioned 114 times within that document. So there's obviously a strong correlation there. So why, when we are home in rural and island communities to 17% of the Scottish population, why is only 10% of that new affordable housing delivery in our communities? And if we're trying to retain our population and grow them, surely we should be having 17% of that target, or arguably actually a lot more. We need to really scale up affordable housing delivery in our rural and island communities. Secondly is about devolving funding. And one thought was that the RPA, the resource planning assumption budget for social housing, could be devolved to local authorities to deliver. And we know in rural areas, the RSLs don't always manage to spend all their RPA budget, so why not allow the local authorities to spend that budget on their identified needs, and also give them the powers to designate grants to community groups to deliver identified housing projects as well. And in rural areas, quite often it's the community groups that are delivering social housing where RSLs can't or won't. This is how Alvaferry came about. No one else wanted to build houses at Alvaferry, so we ended up doing it. So why not give us access to that budget to allow us to do the work that we need to do? And finally, a real frustration we find is the lack of flexibility of public funding, particularly within more homes. So we have access to the Rural and Islands Housing Fund, which is meant to be all-encompassing, but that's it. But there's also the Housing Infrastructure Fund, there's a Net Zero Heat Fund and a Key Worker Fund that we don't have access to. And just as a quick example, we're working on a really exciting worker accommodation project in partnership with our Garland Butte Council in Tobermory and Mull. And when we heard about the Key Worker Fund, we got really excited and thought, we've got this shovel-ready project, this is great. But neither our Garland Butte Council nor ourselves at MICT are eligible to apply for this fund. And that is a real frustration for us. And sort of linked to that is the lack of direct revenue funding for Development Trust, for housing project officers to deliver projects on the ground. And it's really great to have support from organisations like Communities Housing Trust, but we need these project officers working within the communities to deliver the projects. But the funding is always very bitty. In fact, my funding runs out next week. So, and then you're scrabbling around applying for funding for yourself to try and continue this work. So we know what the problems are, as Morven says, we know what the issues are in our communities, we know what the solutions are, and we know how to deliver them, but we just don't have the funding to do so. So if the Scottish Government is really committed to the future sustainability of our communities, we need access to funding to do more projects like Alvaferry.
Thanks, Helen. That was really, really great. I mean, for anyone who's been either had watched or been involved in the previous three online SEDA events in this series, or anyone who's read the materials or listened to them afterwards, funding has come up so many times, not just the challenges of actually funding the construction of these projects, but the challenges of funding the community organisation and community building that's required as the foundation for all that work. So there's some really useful and concrete things you've just suggested, which I really hope we can take forward into the conversations later on this evening and tomorrow. And as the report from this series of events gets sent forward onto the government in terms of where hopefully we'll see some more action taking place. So we have now come to the first of our artistic interludes. So hopefully, I'm crossing my fingers here, if the technology works, we will be live streamed shortly to our first contribution from Chris Pawici, who is going to read a poem.
Yes, I am. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Chris. We can't see you yet, but we can hear you very loud and clear.
Well, as long as you can hear me, that's the main thing. Firstly, big apologies that I'm not, as I should be, 100 or so miles further north than where I am in Dunblane. But I'll try to make up for that by reading this poem. It's simply called Aviemore, and I guess it's just widening the context to look at place. I'll just read it out now. Aviemore. We're talking deep time. We're talking thousands of years of ice and wind, gouging and gralloching these rainy hills, these swift-rivered glens. We're talking trees taking root and the coming of wolf, bear, lynx, men, women, children, hearthstone and axe blade, and how the axe changed everything. Lynx, extinct in Scotland, 300 Common Era. Brown bear, extinct in Scotland, 1000 Common Era. Wolf, extinct in Scotland, 1770 Common Era. And we're talking here and now. The way your timberlands sink into reindeer moss as ewes scatter into the sleety mist. We're talking the logging track and thick, sweet scent of resin while a pine martin gazes through pine branches at Amazon lorries and tourists' buses rumbling down the A9. After all, you get what you pay for. The railway line, the stalking party, the Game Boy, the flat screen TV, the robot lawnmower, the SUV, and net 30 by 2050. Scottish wildcat, close to functionally extinct in Cairngorm's 2019 Common Era. Maybe this time it's time to get real. Maybe it's time to get dreaming. Beyond interest rates and GDP, beyond 0 hours and credit ratings, and believe in a job that suits the mind and the hand. And no food banks, but allotments and orchards and the community hydro, heat pump and turbine, and the free bus to work and back from the Cayley. And when the dancing's done, to lie back and listen to the drub of rain and the skirl of wind and the salmon glinting spay pouring herself on and on. Believe the earth is singing you a love song, and anything could happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. That was really lovely to ground ourselves in a love song of Aviemore and its ancient history and its modern history and a vision for the future as well. So it's very nice to be thinking about the wider elements within which this conversation about building rural futures exists. So I'm now handing over to Ronnie McRae, who's the Chief Executive of Community Housing Trust, who is our next panellist.
Thanks for asking us along. I'll try and race through this quickly. Our work with communities has been very much based on a holistic placemaking approach, and through that work, communities have been creating opportunities on the placemaking focus. As you'll see in the slide, they've been doing lots of innovative things, not just round about housing. It's about creating places and a multi-partner, multi-use and multi-funding opportunities. That's been based on good policy, which I suppose has always been too siloed. But since Brexit and COVID, I feel that is one of the issues that we need to work on, is getting that silos broken down across the different agencies. That the examples you're seeing on slide 1 there are based on cooperative working, flexible working, and communities taking the lead. Communities are keen to do more, but they do need the support and the partnership working. In the current climate, I think we all recognise the sector is very challenged, especially since Brexit. We're struggling for labour and costs are shooting up, but that creates some really positive opportunities for improvement. And in our view, decentralising different sectors, creating opportunities for using more local material, giving smaller regions the opportunity to aggregate their projects, whether that's in housing, commercial or public projects, but joining that to use as a tool to market great places to live, will help with different policies, the environmental policies, the repopulation, regeneration, the housing delivery. All of these things can be done through cooperative working, but we do need everyone to work as proper partners across the sectors, from Scottish Government through to communities. So just to summarise briefly, that it's about joining the policy dots. The policies are there. They need to be interpreted positively with an enabling view, create strong places to live, enable regeneration and repopulation, increase the local workforces. There's a lot of opportunities to do that, and that will help with delivery costs, whilst also enabling benefits for the environment and the circular economy. And it all goes back to placemaking and being able to deliver projects, because if we can't deliver projects, it's great to have these opportunities to talk about things, but unless we're actually delivering, we're really not going to get anywhere. Thank you.
Thanks, Ronnie. I think the importance of joining up dots and breaking down silos has been a really common theme throughout all of the different SEDA land events. And I think the way that you articulated there in terms of it from the community perspective, everything is already joined up, because you're thinking about a rural future through the lens of all the different opportunities, what you can do with your assets, with your resources at a very local level. But it's about how do we join all of those things up either at the local authority level and then also at the national level in terms of making that happen more easily. So I think that's some really good thinking there, and the work of CHT at the coalface of this, I think, is so important. So it's really good to hear that. I'm now going to hand over to Chris who's the director of John Gilbert's Architects, to give us yet another perspective on all of this.
Is it okay if I stand over there a little bit?
Go where you like.
It's just going to be easier to think. So I realized after doing this that I have 3 slides that they all have one thing in common, which is that if we take a step back and say, look, it's really difficult to deliver the amount of housing, and not just housing, but other facilities that we need in rural areas in Scotland. We know about the money, we know about the land issues, but there's an awful lot of things against us. Is it possible that we could look sideways a wee bit? And the principle of all of my 3 ideas is that there is, rather than try to flog the existing system, are there other ways of looking at this? And it's about realizing capacity and potential which is there and is just not being used. So the first one is about buildings that are already there. We have more empty homes, second homes, and houses with one person in them than we could possibly need in terms of the amount of housing that we need to provide. And my feeling is that all of these subjects that I'm raising are subjects which have been of interest as a sort of background sideshow to the main event, which is really just building new houses. But what I'm proposing is that they are not really a sideshow. They could be central planks in developing and delivering what rural areas need. So empty houses, I'm sure you know all about that. Second homes, it's an issue. We have 1 million people living on their own. And if you go to Europe, there are a number of examples where people are incentivized to live together. So particularly young people and old people. And so it's about loneliness, about social care. There's lots of other issues which can be addressed as well as just housing. There are a lot of things that we avoid, problems we avoid if we work with existing buildings, with existing land, embodied carbon, cost infrastructure. There's a lot of ways of doing that, and I'm not a policy person. So next one, please. That's about utilizing an existing resource that's there. The next one is about utilizing the resource of people to develop their own projects. And these are all examples. The top two is Germany, Sweden. My own house on the bottom left, which was built as a group of us who bought land and developed our houses together, and then co-housing at Findhorn, which some of you will know. But the point of it is there is an enormous amount of capacity and money and enthusiasm and interest in developing buildings, not necessarily through a developer or through a standard builder. So community-led housing, co-housing, there's lots of ways of doing this, but I would, if I were Scottish Government, I would be working very hard to encourage that rather than make it difficult, which it currently is to do. Last slide. Megan isn't glaring at me yet, so I think I'm okay. Again, this is a subject which I think is sort of minor interest to people. It's sort of cute, but it's not serious. But I think it's incredibly powerful idea is that you can build partially or wholly your own buildings. And it's particularly valuable because the sort of people who might benefit from it might well be younger people who have time, capacity, fitness, but not a lot of money, and more than enough reasons to want to stay in a place. So if I was Scottish Government, I would be doing my damnedest to make it possible for people to build in part or wholly their own homes. And the idea that people don't have enough skills is not true in my experience. And is that it? Yeah, so supporting self-build mortgages, which is currently quite difficult to do. Sweat equity, which has been a concept which is sort of bobbed up and down in people's consciousness, but I think is incredibly valuable as an idea. And lastly, this idea, which I've worked on in other parts of the world, which is about core homes, so that you provide at relatively low cost the primary facilities that you need for a house, but you allow the ultimate house to be developed over time. And these are all ways of reducing the cost and engaging people in the process rather than imagining that we're totally clever and we can centralize this process. That's me.
Sure. Thank you, Chris. I didn't even have to glare at you. You were well within time. So thank you. I think that's such what you have just said is some really interesting ideas of how we can do what Helen is calling for us to do, which is reduce the cost of the delivery of homes and find innovative ways of meeting our housing needs by thinking outside the box and not necessarily doing things the way they always have done. And that's a really important part of this, because if we're going to move beyond research and action plans and actually start changing things on the ground, we need to stop doing what we've always done and do some things which are different. And Craig is nodding, which is great because you are next. And I'd like to hand over to Craig White, who's the Chief Executive of Agile Homes.
Yeah, super, thank you. And architects appear to need to stand in front of their slides. So you guys don't see any of this. So hi, my name's Craig White, CEO of Agile Homes. We design, we make, and we deliver low carbon, affordable homes for people in housing need. We do a lot of co-housing, and the key thing is if you always do what you always did, which is that you were saying, you'll always get what you always got. So an affordable home is an oxymoron of our time. They simply do not exist. The commercial development model will never deliver an affordable home. It is motivated to make profit for its shareholders. Apologies to any volume house builders in the room. I don't think there are too many here, but they are a machine designed to make money. If you ask it to make less money, the machine doesn't want to do it. So let's stop asking fools Erin's questions and build a new and better model. So we have a double whammy. Why should we do all of this? Well, we have a housing crisis and the climate emergency. And while those are two slightly traumatic things, or mega traumatic things, they're also a catalyst for the need for change. And the need to change needs to happen not at a policy level, but at a now, today level. And the current model for getting affordable homes is a bit like Oliver Twist, where he would go up and hold out his cupped hands and say, please, sir, may I have an affordable home? We can no longer do Oliver Twist affordable housing. We have to do something quite radically different. So what do? We unlock land for free that's hidden in plain sight. So our development model unlocks land that is readily available and can be transacted for £1. And we have many sites in predominantly England. Legislation is slightly different, but land reform is happening in Scotland, where we're doing that, getting land for £1. We never own the land. It goes to a co-housing group, Community Benefit Society, CLT, CIC. There are many receiving organizations of that land, so we're not speculators on land. And everybody's talked about we need to get finance to work better. Well, there's only so much in the cake, so you have to bake a new cake. You have to bring new finance, and you have to flow finance into housing in new and radically different ways. And what we're doing is carbon and social value trading. I'll talk more about that later because I don't have too much time in 4 minutes to explain how that works. But we will do the world's first carbon trade for storage of carbon in the built environment this quarter with a tier 1 legal firm. And we have 5 others. And the whole process of what we do is think small, scale fast. Small is beautiful, Schumacher, microcredit systems. We need to think small and scale fast, not ask government to do big policy changes. We have to do some radical stuff. We will then deliver properly affordable homes. And I'm going to talk very, very quickly about something that we call a housing solution stack. Sounds like software. So right at the top, we have to build something. The first thing we have to do, it has to be person-centered and needs-led. The volume house building house builders talk about building units. I don't know what a unit is, but a home with a person in it and their needs being met, so they're safe, it's civil housing, and it meets their needs so that they can live and work locally is important. Down at the bottom is land. We need to have a mechanism by which we can transfer land, whether that be privately owned, publicly owned, into the hands of community-led organizations. We then need to have a legal structure. And this is where communities start to run out of steam because they say, should I become a director of a community interest company or a co-op or a CBS or a CLT? And there are very few people who would put their hands up to say, I will take statutory obligations as a director of one of those entities. So we need to find the means by which those machines can be made. Then we need to have an investment wrapper, finance flow, whether that be debt, equity grants, savings, gift aid, tax relief. We need to pull the levers of capitalism to enable new finance flows into how we build things. We then need to build homes. We build prefabricated, low carbon homes made of timber and straw and hemp. And then we need to hand that over to a receiving organization that is properly structured to manage and maintain that. And this is the map that we have to draw to make all of that true. It looks complex. Complexity is not a problem. Building housing and development is not rocket science. The Range Rover drivers, the Porsche drivers are not geniuses. They're motivated by profit. That's a very simple motivation technique. So this is us working in London with the Greater London Authority, Hackney Borough Council, Homes England, that's all very English, but they're all grant and enabling organizations. And just a last picture is, this is Somerset Council. They came to us and said, we think we like what you're talking about, how would you do it? So we did the land assembly, we did the finance, we brought in the housing association, and we're building 18 affordable homes. And of the 400 homes we build over the next 18 months, 90% of those will be for social rent. And I don't know of any other organization in the country that's doing that. I think I got a frown, so I'm going to stop.
Thank you, Craig. You got a small frown, but it's so fascinating to hear more about what you do. And I know we're going to have more questions from the floor and from those watching online. So I know we can hear more about that in the next hour and a half. Now, last but very not much least is Niall Curran, who's an associate director at Scottish Futures Trust. Over to you, Niall.
Well, I certainly hope it's not least. Right. No, thank you very much to Gail and SEDA Land for the invitation. So obviously we were asked to do kind of 3 big ideas to kind of say to Scottish Government. So I'm trusting my first slide is on there. So my 3 big ideas. So first, housing is critical infrastructure and it should be valued as such. So you get what you pay for in Chris's poem. Housing investment should be appraised on the wider outcomes it helps places achieve, not just on their price and the number of homes actually built. The where, what, why, and how homes are built helps determine the answer to many social and economic and environmental questions about a place. Public sector support, which recognises and importantly measures and values these, would add another layer to the additionality that the planning system can bring to proposals. Combined, this can help get the right homes to the right places. This outlook needs to be encouraged throughout the public sector, and it should be embedded more solidly as part of the business case for housing investment and public sector support. As one soft leadership example from down south, Homes England are commissioning some research, which is now being published around the use of social value measurement and the difficulty around brownfield regeneration, etc. as well. So that just shows you when it's not more expensive, it still can be done. Number 2, take an all tenure principle to enabling housing delivery, of which affordable housing remains the most significant part. So obviously the Affordable Housing Supply Programme has delivered a huge number of affordable homes over a number of years. It has its challenges and limitations though, as a tool to deliver housing which addresses complex place needs, which I would say are more potent in rural areas and places facing regeneration and rapid economic change. The programme measures success in the number of affordable homes built and how affordable they are compared to an existing market, a market which may not actually be fit for purpose for the future. This may not be enough, or indeed the right thing for the place. And it's now even more difficult for capital grant to meet those delivery challenges by itself, with all the cost inflation, interest rate increases, and the fact that we need to now tackle the more difficult sites coming forward. And obviously that grant is now becoming more scarce. That current cost-benefit calculation has to be flexed even more considerably to justify providing more grant for the same number of affordable homes. A better alternative is kind of going back to my first point, change what you measure on the benefit side of that equation. The number of homes and their affordability are not the whole impact that grant unlocks in a place, nor are they the only issues that a good development actually addresses. So the Affordable Housing Supply Programme, though, must, however, be accompanied by a much stronger, clearer sense of strategy and intent from the Scottish Government to housing beyond the affordable sector, as that's currently defined. The housing crisis is manifold and cannot be solved by directly supporting new affordable homes only. Planning can't fill that gap either. There's a strong case for the public sector to support a greater range of homes and tenures where these enable good place-based investment. SG must help innovate models for finance, delivery, tenure, and governance, and they need to be explored, tested, and where those are acceptable, provided with policy and finance support before being shared and replicated. They should value and drive the impact of building housing of all types and tenure, and recognise that all are worthy of support under the right conditions. Last point, still no red card, or the blue card these days, show leadership on implementing NPF4. Now, NPF4, I'm sure we'll get on to in more detail. It's obviously intended to be a significant step change in the planning system, recognising that activity is development-led and must be balanced against environmental, net zero, social, economic considerations, again, on that place focus. The key word is balance. No development is going to be everything to everybody, but that's not a reason not to do that development. The challenge is recognising and managing that in the round while translating from the plan down to all those individual appraisals of proposals. The result, unfortunately, is stakeholders assessing these proposals individually, either through the lens of which NPF4 policies, in their view, apply most to them, or marking it down in all areas if it doesn't achieve one area, leading to unintended consequences. This is a challenge shared by everyone around NPF4, and we are in the early stages of implementing it. The answer lies in everybody involved recognising the need for pragmatism and balance. Encouraging this, though, will require regular guidance, best practice examples, knowledge sharing, and iteration. But as visionaries of the plan, Scottish Government do welcome constructive and informed feedback, I'm told, and should take the lead on this for all stakeholders. And one example of this that they are doing is their Planning Infrastructure in Place Action Group. But again, just kind of keeping that momentum up and really listening to the actuals would be helpful. And I think a key message to finish on, yes, these are all big ideas and big changes. It's very difficult to do that in a public sector where many people are the same people have done things the old way. So we've got to get the messaging right and bring them along the journey, get them to see their agency and get them along with you.
Thank you, Niall. That was really great. So we have now come to the end of our 6 panelists starting off in the conversation. And the next part of the discussion is going to be the next part of the conversation, is going to be a discussion between the 7 of us before we open out to question and answers from everyone here in the room and also those listening online. I wanted to start now on Niall's last point about leadership, because we've heard calls so far for doing things differently, needing to not continue doing the same thing in order if you want to get a different outcome. We've heard calls for increased ambition and breaking new ground. And we've heard calls for moving away from simply researching and consulting and developing new action plans. And given the fact that this conversation is thinking really about what Scottish Government needs to do to move this all forward, I'd like to ask the panelists first, if there's one thing that would demonstrate leadership from the Scottish Government, what would that be? And before I hand it over to you all, I want you to think not just in terms of affordable housing, but this broader focus of this conversation on building rural futures. And Niall, I'm sorry, I'm going to go to you first because you were the one that brought up leadership.
It's my own fault, isn't it? So no, I think it's kind of going back to that last point. I think they have to be quite strong and realize their sort of agency, but not within a division. So the planning division can't come forward and say, this is a good idea because, and we think this should have been done this way because, one, they might not actually see that as their remit to do. You know, local planning authorities have their own kind of competence in that area. But there are plenty of examples to almost pick on where that kind of cross-division working has yielded results, and nothing is perfect. But there has been good outcomes across that. And I think it's actually demonstrating to not only, probably even to themselves, that this kind of thing can be done, as well as encouraging that cross-divisional working and to kind of get out of the silos. So it's a really tricky one to start with, to be honest. But I think taking the lead on finding good examples and propagating them, thinking about what was good about it, what was not so great about it, accepting that it is a difficult world and you can't do that every time. But, you know, actually putting the real application of NPF4 and putting that front and center.
Great. So let's go back in the reverse order. So Craig, what would you say to that?
I think it's really hard for governments to come up with a solution when there are two big crises. We're in both of them right here, right now. So part of it is to get out the way. And that's not fair to say, but sometimes the best thing, because your government is running a big super tanker of an organization, and it is really hard for it to be agile and move quickly. So it needs to find means by which you find the best examples and go, we like that. So the super tanker needs to set off a whole pile of speedboats that are running around, not running and trying, but actually delivering on better models. And almost everybody has said what the solution needs to be: a better grant regime, more community-led housing, more empowerment, and more enabling. And my job is not to describe how England is a little bit better, but the policy, we have Homes England, and it put 160 million quid into affordable housing and the community-led space. I don't know what the grant regime has been like in Scotland, but it's probably nowhere near that, and not even in proportional terms. So the Part of it is to put liquidity into that, and that is to allow the grant to flow fast and into the right spaces, where with the right kind of enabling organizations ready and to support those communities, because the know-how and energy in the community is strong, as we've heard and seen, but the capacity and competence is not always there. So we need to have enabling organizations as well, well-funded and making sure it can go. So lots of speedboats.
Thanks. Thanks, Craig. And it's one of the enabling organisations on the platform. Ronnie, maybe I can just, sorry, Chris, I will come to you, but what would be the one thing the government could do to help you in your speedboat be faster and delivering more?
Just one thing. You're a hard chair. I mean, our opinion is that, you know, a lot of the hard work's been done. Scottish Government have put good policy in place. You know, that it's enabled a lot to be done. Communities have embraced that and done a lot of work. I think the political will is there. What we need to do is recognise that the world's changed. We to really react and do more rather than just sit about and talk about it. We have to really change the sector, and I think decentralising is a massive opportunity. It's not a problem, I don't think. It's an opportunity, and if Scottish Government and the other enabling strategic bodies can really be part of the solution and work in partnership with communities, businesses, landowners, we could deliver an awful lot more. The examples are there. We need to learn from it and really move in the speedboats now to get things moving, to benefit the environment, the repopulation, regeneration, and a construction sector that's really on its knees at the moment through lack of labour.
Yes, no, I think that's really important. Just to push you on that though, when you're talking about decentralisation, so you're not just simply talking about decentralisation down to local authority levels, you're talking about much deeper than that, right down to empowering communities and local groups to move
Yes,
this
absolutely. You know, I mean, there needs to be some strength in numbers. So but smaller regions, you know, even within Highland, you know, there's like the Northwest Sutherland, Wester Ross, Skye, Lochaber, Cairngorms. And there's a lot of willing partners there, businesses, communities, a lot of know-how, a lot of finance that could be used more creatively to create circular economies and a stronger, sustainable community, really.
Okay, great. Thank you. Chris, would you like to go next?
Yes, I think that actually I was quite clear what my answer was, but I realise now it's just a different way of saying a similar thing, if I'm honest. But my take on it was, how do you show leadership? And if you are competent and confident, it is easy for you to let go. That's a sort of personality thing. And I feel that when you're not confident and you're not competent, you tend to hold on to things. Just people do that and governments do that. And I see that quite a lot in my conversations, is that people don't want to let go of the power to make decisions. And it makes me think that they are less competent and less confident than they could be. So if I was charged with giving, with leadership, I would let go of as much power as possible, such that the decision-making processes were as local as possible. And for what it's worth, my memory of being a member of the Green Party for a long time is that, you know, it is a fundamental ecological principle that decision-making is taken as locally as possible. And so that would be my view of what leadership would look like. But I think that's actually what they said.
I think it's a really important point, and I think that point you made at the beginning of what you just said there, in terms of the need to build confidence and build competency in order to let go of it. It's empowerment, empowering yourself first in order to empower others, I think is really, really critical. And we have so many examples. We have all the research out there we need. It's really just about building the confidence to actually start to deliver it. Helen.
Yeah, just to echo what everyone else has said, particularly about decentralisation and local autonomy and community empowerment, but also at civil service level, empower the civil servants to make more flexible decisions, you know, decentralise, let them say yes more rather than no, which is what we get told all the time.
Sorry, had you finished? Thanks. Great. And Morgan, your one thing around leadership.
I think it's interesting looking at rural housing and how it differs from housing generally, and not just urban, but generally across Scotland. And the conversations I've been having over the last year or so is everywhere I talk to, it's just so much more difficult to do it. So we'll lean into doing the bits that are easier. The system supports the bits that are easier to do. And yet there's community organisations, there's housing associations that are just desperate and really want to do it. But ultimately, I think to myself, so who wakes up or goes to bed at night worrying about rural housing? And I'm not meaning Helen and Mull, who I know you do, but I mean at that strategic national level, who is responsible for ensuring that rural housing, given that it's differentiated from general housing? So I don't know whether I'm describing a rural housing agency or a different set of measurements that sit within the local authority in terms of how they quantify or look at how are we doing with rural housing? How are we, ticking these boxes? And yes, NPF4 talks about it's there to support depopulation, etc. So how are we holding feet to the fire on prioritising that, particularly at a time where we're seeing, Edinburgh, Glasgow, housing emergencies, where are the big numbers, where are the big voices coming from? So who speaks up for rural housing, I guess, in that kind of leadership space? We can do our bit in relation to what we are seeing challenges that are affecting our economy in particular, but it's just something that crosses my mind a lot.
I think that's such an important point. And it's interesting because we're talking on the one hand about the need to reduce silos and join dots. And that means everyone should be responsible for delivering rural futures and affordable housing. But that actually then reduces the chance that one single person and agency is going to be accountable for delivering that. So it's about how do we find the right balance between joining the dots and reducing the silos, but actually having a degree of accountability so that there is someone who's going to sleep thinking about this and is taking this forward and actually providing the leadership and the individual agency and individual person's ambition to move this all forward. And maybe that's something that we can discuss tomorrow as the conference moves on. Now, I have a question I would like to ask those of you who are responsible for sort of delivering houses on the ground. So Chris, Craig, Ronnie and Helen, is there anything you've heard from the other panelists this afternoon that really inspires you that you're going to take away in your work and sort of try and do or use? Craig, I did give you the heads up, so.
Yes, of course, is what I have to say. And because otherwise so I think the engine of community-led housing is a space where there is huge energy because the people who participate are the people who need the housing. So it's the shortest supply chain possible. I need a home to live in, and I'd like that to be in a rural setting. The unlocking that engine is not straightforward or easy. We've done co-housing projects. We did the Lilac co-housing project. The reason why Lilac worked was there was an economic engine that sat at the heart of that is how do you become effectively a developer? They don't like me saying this, but they were a developer of their own housing need. And they worked with the new economic foundation to create what's called mutual home ownership society, effectively a shareholding, so that all the Tories can be happy with that, Maggie Thatcher shareholding cohort of people in the UK, but actually owning shares in something that is tangible and right on their doorstep. They can, so I think the community-led, the enabling part is we were talking about grant. The grant always dries up, and it's just, for you to say, my funding runs out next week, I'm sure, and I hope you have funding lined up. In effect, the liquidity has to be done from government for that. It has to put that in, or we have to create new financial flows. And that's partly, that's not what I'm here to talk about now in this answer. So, and then your point, Niall, about social value. Social value is a very fluffy term for 99% 1% of the population. Social value is a metric. It has Excel spreadsheets. It has numbers which have pound signs in front of them. And the social value embedded and unlocked in a community is hugely valuable. And there are corporates all around the world who have legal obligations to reduce their carbon emissions and deliver their ESG and CSR obligations, who are desperate to write checks. They are literally desperate to write checks. So I think it's about making the legislative opportunity from central government to give those pathways for these new finance to flow. And everybody else's answers were fantastic as well, and I'll take those away.
Thank you. Ronnie, is there anything particular you've taken away from this afternoon?
I'm going to be a bit of a wimp and say everything was quite inspiring. I think the positivity, my feeling is the solutions are there. And we're hearing that. What we need to do is just get back on track with delivery. We've hit a bump in the road through Brexit and COVID, plus many other things. But we see that as an opportunity, and I think that's what I'm hearing from the panel, is that with the right partnerships, and especially from Scottish Government and the strategic bodies, we should and could be doing an awful lot more.
Thanks. Helen?
Yeah, just to pick up on your points about number of single person households and about co-housing, and it's not something we do much of in Scotland. There's much more examples in England and elsewhere, and I think that's something I think in a very rural context would be good to see more of, and how can we make that work? And also what you're talking about, social value as well. How can we get that up the agenda more as well, and the benefits of that, and making that really clear, as well as the financial costs that we hear about.
Thank you. Craig? Sorry, Chris.
You knew
Sorry,
you'd
I
get
knew
that.
I was going to do
You
that
knew
at
you were
some
gonna
point.
get it
I've done it now, so I'll move on.
I actually have a different answer to Craig, so that's nice for a change. So I know what I was thinking about, and it was triggered by a couple of comments about sustainability. One of the things I come across a lot, and it's worth saying out loud, is that people will say, look, it's so difficult to make houses happen. We have to ditch all this sustainability stuff. We just need to knock them out because we can't afford it anyway, really. So we're just sort of pushing the boundaries to get to a point where it's even vaguely sensible. And I'm offered the possibility of saying, well, either these people get houses or they don't get anything at all. And, you think, oh, well, in that case, fair enough. Let's just ditch everything in terms of sustainability. And I am extremely unhappy about that for obvious reasons. But one of the things that's worth saying is that I now spend most of my time talking about money and cost and better quality buildings. The thing that's worth saying is that we know for a fact that everything we do to reduce the effects of climate change now is cheaper than if we don't do it now and we do it later. So it's true that it's expensive to do some of the things that we're doing, but it will only get more expensive. And that everybody sort of goes, yes, well, yes, of course. But I mean, the point is we haven't got the money. So, but it is worth saying it's really important that we don't give up on this stuff now. I know how to build buildings which are completely energy efficient. You can be talking 20, 30 pounds a month to keep warm. That's significant financial benefits to people, usually on benefits, trying to keep warm. We can build buildings which are entirely sourced from natural materials locally. We can build them which are completely demountable, so there's no waste whatsoever. We can do it in a way which causes no ill health, no respiratory problems, no COPD long-term issues. We can do it with almost zero embodied carbon. And we can also design buildings which anticipate and manage all of the things that we know climate change is going to throw at us, which will also produce a lot of costs that we haven't factored in. So there's an enormous amount that we can do that looks to future cost reduction and actually being nice to people, which if we decide that we can't afford to do that now is a huge mistake if you're talking about cost in the longest possible term. Oh, no, you've already got one.
Thank you. And I think that's such a good sort of point to end up, and it ties on to this connection, this thing we were discussing previously about leadership, because leadership isn't just about joining the dots and being ambitious now, it's about looking ahead and about envisaging what's the world going to be like in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, and designing now for that long-term future. So thanks for connecting us back, Chris. to that point. Right, okay, we are now ready for the second of our artistic interludes, which this time is in the room and is from an amazing artist, musician, songwriter called Motte Parrott, who's going to come and sing for us on the stage. So we're just going to take a minute while he sets up his kit. While Motte is getting ready, I would like to say after this, we're going to be moving out to the board question and answers from all of you in the room and also everyone online.
Hi, everyone. Firstly, thank you so much to Gail for commissioning me to write a song. It's not every day musicians get that opportunity. So firstly, I really appreciate that. And it's nice to have a focus. A lot of my songs kind of have this kind of eco kind of focus. So it's nice to have even more focus. So I kind of took the sustainable placemaking and zoomed out because I think a lot of the same issues on this small local scale are true kind of globally. So I guess it's quite a general song. It's called Our Hands. Man, we were on a downhill run when things fell out of order. Our days begun with rising sun, now end with rising water that will swallow us in fierce flow unless we let go lightly, babe. I'll let her know. In empathizing with the pain shared by every stranger, their faces hiding loaded guns amidst the forest fire. We lighten grievings, laden boughs, learn to break through gently, babe. Our heavy clouds. The learning that's unfolding may be sinking like a stone, but swim against the current, knowing you are not alone. The learning that's unfolding may be sinking like a stone, but swim against the current, knowing you are not alone. We set our sights on distant lights, ever reaching skyward, standing down as guardians of this lonely garden, with each unique expression of our time falling through our hands. Thank you. Thanks so much. Cheers. I've been politely asked to write a happier one next time.
Okay. Thank you, Motte. That was simply beautiful and doesn't have to be happy. That was very lovely. Gail was telling us before we started about how one of your songs in the previous event had made some people cry in the audience, which I hope we have, I hope we're still feeling positive and passionate and not tearful, but optimistic and thinking about swimming against the tide together and all that means for everyone. So thank you very much. So we are now going to open up for question and answers for the rest of the hour. We have about 50 minutes and I promise you I will make sure that we finish at 6 o'clock as promised so that we can all get on to drinks receptions and other things that people have to do. So you're going to have to bear with me because we are going to try and make sure that we have questions coming in, not just from everyone in the room, but also online. So what we're going to do is hopefully take 2 or 3 questions from the floor. And I'm going to ask Kirsten then to give us a question from everyone online and we'll answer the questions all together in a cluster, if that works. So who has a question in the room? Lady in the front and Annie and then David at the back. And if you can just say who you are and where you're from when you start, that would be great.
My name's Kate. I work for Mull & Iona Community Trust along with Helen. I wanted to ask Chris to explain a little bit more about the self-build because you made it sound easy and cheap. And I'm really, really intrigued by that.
Can we hold off and we'll take all the questions together at the end? And okay.
Sorry, I feel like Mick is hogging the microphone this afternoon. I've got a question. I think it was for Agile, for Craig. I'd like an introduction, please, to these people who've got checks to sign.
I'll be in the bar later.
Thank you. I'm Annie McKee. I'm from the James Hutton Institute and I'm on the board of Rural Housing Scotland. And my question is related actually to Murray's. I have some caution around that new financial flows. So I wondered if you could reflect on any possible unintended consequences and the kind of economic power disparities that might arise between a small scale community development and a large corporate looking for ESG outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you. And then there was David Stewart in the back. Second row at the back as well.
Thanks. I'm David Stewart from the Scottish Land Commission, also on the Rural Housing Scotland board. Yeah, my question for the panel was really around the potential of natural capital to help fund community outcomes and green housing.
Thank you, David. No, on you go, Kirsten. Sorry, Gail, could you give Kirsten the microphone so she can read out the question or a summary of a question from online?
So we've got a question. When local decisions are made and a model developed for government support to the rural communities, how can that same model be reused by more communities and co-housing groups, for example, to not have to repeat the whole process over and over again?
Okay, great. Thank you. So we've got some fantastic questions here. We've got one for Chris about self-builds, got a couple for Craig around who your investors are, I guess, and what have you thought about what unintended consequences there might be from working with ESG investors? It's a question for the whole panel about what your views are about connecting up natural capital investments and housing. And then finally, a question from online about how can communities, I guess, learn from each other and not just reinvent the wheel all the time. So, Chris.
I feel that mine was an easier question, so thank you. Right, so the principle here is that if you do stuff yourself, you save money. That's the principle. And if the issue is that people cannot afford, or we socially as a society cannot afford to build the things we need to build, are there ways around that problem? And we know that there are enormous numbers of people who have more than enough capacity to do this. And it's moreover the sort of people who would benefit from doing it because it's their house. So they're suitably motivated. And I think that there are a million ways that you can do self-build. You can fundamentally buy land and build it yourself, but for most people that's a bit much. There are lots of ways of it being partial. a normal example is my house, which we bought land as a group, and none of us could afford to do when we got the builders' quotes back. So we chopped various things out, and then in my case, basically crippled my business by spending every evening working on it. But the point is, I saved £50,000 in a year by doing it myself. And it's true that my wife would say that it was not worth the sacrifice, but it is also true that, I mean, £50,000 is a lot if it's actually 100,000 as a mortgage, and it was a year's work. Fundamental point is I saved an enormous amount of money by doing it myself. And that principle, however it pans out across different communities, different age groups, different financial situations, land usage situations, it's the same principle.
Sorry, I mean, there was a general comment to everyone about, question about sort of the connections between the natural capital investments and housing. I don't know if is that something you want to talk about? No, okay, that's fine. In that case, I'll maybe, can I keep this microphone? Craig, can you give Morven that microphone, and that will be easier. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think that this is something we've been thinking about. We're doing some work with Scottish Futures Trust and the Scottish National Investment Bank about, is there really a market out there for that sort of green investment that recognises that here we have an area in the Highlands and Islands where we're going to host so much of the energy transition that is required in order to, meet our net zero ambitions, not just in Scotland, but actually in the UK. So if that's our land and our resources and our geography that's being optimised to do that, is that not a good argument or persuasive argument that might say to sort of green investors, well, maybe you want to put something back into a housing fund of some sort in order so that we can optimise that for our part of the world. And then, of course, we then hopefully get additional housing as a result, which helps to address our depopulation. So it's a feasibility at the moment as to, does that stack up as a potential rural housing fund, along with others, along with, yes, government, but also, the transmission companies themselves and others that might want to feed into that. So it's just something that we're looking at the moment and testing.
So just to be clear then, so that's thinking about the delivery of affordable housing as a wider package of, I guess, community benefit sharing that's coming from but it's being delivered by companies who are involved in natural.
Well, it's twofold. One is there is the community benefit angle in terms of if these companies are needing to use our resources and our coastal areas for their offshore turbines and things like that. Yes, there's a community benefit angle, but if there are other green investors who are looking on at how do we fix and achieve net zero for the UK, then maybe we want to invest in rural housing in the places where we're actually going to be setting up these pylons and creating the transmission that's needed to ship it all down to England, to be honest.
Thank you. Ronnie, did you want to say something on this?
I didn't really, because I'm not sure. I'm not sure what natural capital really is, but our approach to that is again, it's about the holistic one. It's not just about the peat and the wind and the water. It's about how communities can create better places, use more local materials, reduce the need to commute, create jobs for foresters, to create more trees, to more building, the circular economy. And I think the holistic approach to natural capital is a great opportunity with some potential investment as well.
Sounds like you know lots about it. Niall.
Yeah, I'm not going to profess to be an expert on natural capital in that as well. And actually, what I might do is basically say, I'm not an expert, so I won't say anything, which is rare for me. But what I'll do is I'll probably pass it, I mean, unless anybody else has something to say about it, but it's kind of like, potential answer was kind of linked to an answer to the question that was put to Craig.
Go for it.
So, but I'll let Craig answer first because it was his question.
Okay, and then we'll go back to you, and then we'll get some more questions from the floor and online.
So there were two parts, who and governance. That was, how is this going to be safe for communities to enter into these transactions? And so has anybody ever offset a flight or a journey by clicking on the button, would you like to offset your carbon emissions on a flight? Nobody flies. I know, we're all good. But okay, so you've done it. What validation did you get and what governance of reporting did you get back from that? Big fat zero, but you did it. So you entered into a transaction that in some shape or form, we hope, will have offset your carbon emissions. So I can't remember who it was, but there's just been a big audit of all the offset models around the globe at the moment, and 96% of them were found to be incapable of standing audit. So that is called junk offsetting. So only 4% of all the offsetting ever done by individuals or corporates could stand an audit. So we've been happily offsetting, doing cap and trade for a long time without any real understanding of if it is doing the right thing. And there is some amazing offsets out there. They're fantastic developing economy offsets. So what we said was there are two things, carbon and social value. And if we can accept that a tree eats CO2 every day of the week, it is effectively carbon locked up into the fabric of the timber, which can then be locked up into the fabric of the building. And we work with timber, straw, and hemp. And at that point, it is a legitimate storage mechanism that can be audited. It can be blockchained. It can be checked because they are built assets. They are insured and they have door numbers on the front. They can say your carbon storage is in number 16 Lochaber Avenue. But we don't want some corporate knocking on the door saying, can I meet the carbon? So you need to have an interface between the individual that's benefiting from that and a large corporate writing that check. So effectively that has to be done through a platform, and that platform has to be governance and have everything in place. And yet part of this is we all put our money in banks and we get our terrible interest rate, if at all, a bit better nowadays, but my SIP used to report 0.75% interest rate to me, and it cost more, I think, for the bank to write me that letter than it did in terms of earnings off my SIP. So the key thing is pulling the levers of capitalism is done every day by people who drive Porsches and Range Rovers, but we don't challenge them on that. So why would communities not say, we can transact with an appropriately governance entity, and then if there is a big corporate over there, and you might want to, you could say, we won't take money from Aramco, we will not take money from, and my pension reports back on what's sustainable, what's legal, and what's all good about investment. So effectively, there has to be a platform that sits in between the recipient and benefit and the person on the other side transacting the finance. So you won't get a corporate saying, we own that, because they won't own it, because the word investment is really important to understand. This is not an investment. There is no return promised or given to those people who do this. Sorry, I'm going to rant a little bit, and apologies. But at that point, there is no yield giving back to the corporate. It is simply their obligation by law has to reduce their carbon emissions, and they can't do it fast enough. So they write checks to allow somebody else to do it. The storage of carbon is an intangible asset, and the social value is an intangible asset. And at that point, you've got a lot of value in communities, doing amazing things, creating jobs, doing hubs, doing forestry, doing agroforestry, doing really, really cool stuff. But you need never meet anybody who's written a check to support that. So a little bit of Marxism pulling the levers of capitalism.
I think Craig will be around.
I will be in
this
the bar
evening
later.
and tomorrow, because I know that a lot of people are going to have some more questions and drill into that a little bit more. Niall, did you want to say something on this?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really interesting point, and I just wanted to add to it because institutional investment into homes and affordable homes is something that I'm looking at, because as you kind of say, there is a need for greater levers from these kinds of places, particularly as capital grant gets reduced. And, frankly, I think it's very difficult to ask everybody to be able to self-build their home, for example. Not to say that's not a good thing, but not something that's going to deliver the 110,000 affordable homes. But in terms of it, but you're right in terms of you've got ESG things and you've got various things there are however many disclosure frameworks around this, reporting frameworks, lack of transparency, even the B Corp stuff. They've been found wanting in various bits as well. My answer to that is kind of twofold. So there are cohorts of impact investors out there. So impact investment is somewhere on that spectrum between philanthropy and basically return-seeking capitalism, all hell else with the effects of my investment. And what they do is it balances that return with all of the social value impact that it has as well. Their view is that that social value impact that I'm having actually secures my returns 20 years, 30 years into the future. And who's that really important for? All of our pension schemes. So they want, long income kind of things, inflation protected cash flows for 40 years so that they can actually meet all of our pensions. Fingers crossed, touch wood, everything, that I will have one. That's going to come forward. And what better way to kind of actually use that money that they already have, they already manage for us, than to putting it into the communities that we have. Now, in terms of how that kind of interacts with communities and RSLs and other organizations who are actually building the damn things and the people who are living in the things, that's where the challenge is. And that's where the proactivity and the agency from the public sector can actually be really powerful. If you want to kind of collate all that money in a fund and want all types and sizes of entity to do this, and what you need to do is you need to bring that pipeline together, match that off with all of this funding, kind of say, put them together, make them, with your Barbie and Kendalls, and that'll start to happen. But what you need to do is try and deliver a framework that means that you can be more certain about the outcomes that you're getting. Does it really matter to me that my pension fund is making a 5% return when I know they've built a really good house in a place that works, that is, because the public sector has been there to basically put that conditionality on it? And there are legal mechanisms to do this. Long leases is one way to do it that I look at, because only RSLs, local authorities and their subsidiaries can actually long lease homes in Scotland. So that is one pretty easy way for a long income kind of route to come through to homes. So that's a really good question, because you just got to be careful who you pick.
Okay, thank you, Niall. Ronnie, before we go to the next round of questions, there was a question from the online about the sort of scaling up and how communities can learn from each other and not reinvent the wheel. I'm sure you have a view on that, because that might be something that CHT spend a lot of time doing.
Yeah, I mean, most communities that we work with, there's a lot of peer-to-peer learning. So it's looking at the proof of concept that's been delivered, projects all over the place. And I think that's quite valuable, being able to learn from folks, because a lot of projects happening, they're not all perfect. So we've got to learn from the mistakes as well as the good bits. But yeah, there's a lot of positive learning can happen. I would encourage folks to just speak to each other. I'd also encourage Scottish Government just to have another look at what actually is happening and what's there, because we could, like I say, and I'm a bit of a parrot here, but we should be doing a lot more, but we need the proper partnerships, and that's equitable partnerships from the top all the way.
Helen, I mean, you must, as a community group, how do you tap into these peer networks and get into this world of information and sharing?
We've got quite good networks already. So within Argyll and Bute, the council have a community housing network. We meet quarterly, we share information, we raise topics that we would like to learn more about. So we have guest speakers come along, and then that gives us the contacts with each other. So then we can go off ourselves and There's community learning exchanges, so there's funding for community groups to go and visit each other, either individually or collectively. And through Scottish Islands Federation, we've set up a housing group. And so just yesterday, we had a meeting with the housing minister, and we're working together on things like responses to the Rural and Islands Housing Action Plan. But it's also an opportunity, formally and informally, for us then to work together to learn from each other, positives and negatives, things that worked. And actually people really want to know what's not worked. What would you do differently next time? And I think that's really important for us all for ourselves to think about what we would do differently, but also for other groups to know. And as things change over time as well.
Absolutely. I think knowing what not to do is just as important as knowing what to do. Okay, so I think we've got time for some more questions. So who in the room would like to ask a question? We've got the gentleman
with the mic and ask a question.
Of course you can, but I'd
Thank
like
you.
to get other questions too in this round.
Okay, do you want me first or last?
Last, please.
Okay, fine.
There's the gentleman in the back, and then
Thanks very much. David Miller from the James Hutton Institute. Here we are sitting in Aviemore, middle of the Cairngorms National Park. I'd like to ask if the panelists have any opinions on what visions for housing or arguments would they encourage being included in the proposals currently being developed and submitted for a new national park in Scotland? What options would they include for their new governance, and what sort of experiences from the two existing parks should be brought to the fore?
very timely question, I would say. We also have Ewan down in the front row here who already has the mic. It's not turned on though, so.
Is that it?
Yes.
There we go. Ewan McLachlan from many hats today. I'm a local development officer with the Ascent Development Trust. I'm a member of the Northwest 2045 group in Northwest Sutherland and trustee of Development Trust Association Scotland. So I have every empathy and sympathy with Helen in regards funding. We've got 60% of our funding and we've been told by government it'll be May or June before we find out if we can get the rest of our funding to continue our post. However, I digress. So today's title is Building Futures in Rural Scotland, and two or three of the panellists mentioned devolution and devolving things down to the local. And I think that's what the Scottish Government is missing. Our most northern cabinet member lives in Dundee. She was here last year as Housing Secretary, and it's difficult to see what advances we've had in the last year. So my take on it is really quite simple. Both north and south of the Central Belt, we're in crisis when it comes to housing. And we really need to start thinking about some of the ideas that Ronnie's had about, you know, builders merchants in inaccessible areas to bring down the price, etc. And what I would love to see from government and you guys pushing is an actual blueprint for the rural. We're talking about 10% of the 110,000 homes being built in the rural by 2040 is where they go. 1,000 homes in Nairn, you know, increasing the foothold of Greater Inverness does nothing for the Highlands. Whereas if we can go from Applecross to Betty Hill and actually put 1,000 homes and 100 townships all the way up the north and west, we would transform this age-old problem. So my question is, how do we get government to listen to us about this?
Okay, great. Gail.
Oh, sure.
Go ahead.
Gail Halverson, SEDA. Sort of two things. One is, as being on the Gorebridge Community Development Trust for 10 years, certainly we got no support. We had no networks. We got a £3 million community centre up. I felt we reinvented every wheel in the book and none of our knowledge was passed on anyway. So I do think that needs to be formalised. That because we learned so much. But sort of slightly related to that, I just would like to know what the panel think about, you know, that we're talking about sort of top-down and vertical exchange of information and lack of flow. It seems to be incredibly inefficient at the moment, and this has come up in all the conversations. I think it might be Niall, somebody I was speaking to said that for every 4 people in the Scottish Government looking at this, there's 1 in local and then 1 volunteer on the ground. How do you think we can best move that information so it's more efficient, the flow of information, when you've got the local knowledge at ground level that's very important, but then you've got the sort of professional architects and lawyers at the intermediary level, and then you've got the governance at the top. There must be a better way. Is it seconding Scottish Government people down to local level? What do you propose to make that much more efficient?
Okay, you've got a bit of time to think about that. We've got another gentleman over there, and then we're going to go to Kirsten.
Hello, Peter Corn from Harriet in the Borders. We have a small community which I've pondered over many years what contribution the Scottish Government was having towards sustaining rural populations, because for example, we lost our shop because they took away the post office, and then we lost our bus service because they gave us a railway but no station. And if you within a questionnaire that we put about, people's priorities are transport, the school, the broadband, and housing. And what should happen in all communities is an incremental development of housing, so that every year there's somebody who lives in the community is able to build a house, so that you can live in the same community as your parents, and you can bring in new folk who then sustain things like the school. We found that the local farmers are quite willing to give land over to people who are part of the community, and if you have a community which is stagnant, inevitably its spirit and strength moves away, and that is a major cause of depopulation.
Did you have a question, or is it more a comment?
Well, it's the perhaps the planning process is a major factor in saying you're in the countryside, it's rural, you can't have a house. So that's ridiculous. You need new housing in every community, and the government should work towards that being allowed to happen, whether it's planning or whether it's finance. It needs to be there.
Okay.
And I think I agree with Chris 100% that the resources that young people have are enough, with the encouragement and the opportunity to build their own homes.
Okay, thank you. Niall, maybe that one can be one for you, because you were the one that mentioned NPF4 before. So Kirsten, you've got a question online as well.
Yeah, so we've got a few questions coming in online, which is great. But one person's asking, can you discuss the joined up thinking that could become the solution for co-housing and non-developer led housing to be affordable and access the right support and funding? And can the panelists suggest who or which organisations could actually work together to propose a framework that would work and make that proposal to the government? Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kirsten. So just to recap then, we've got a question on national parks and housing. We've got a question about how do we get the government to listen to all of this. We've got a question on how to formalise the lesson learning and network and sharing, and how to address this imbalance where we've got a lot of folk at the national level thinking about this, and the resources and capacity and is getting smaller and smaller as we get down to the local level. And then we've got this question about NPF4 and planning, and finally about the joined up thinking needed to deliver more co-housing, in particular, who actually needs to be partnering to do that. I'm going to go around all the panelists again. I think this is going to be the last chance so that we can finish on time. So can you please choose whichever question you want to answer? But I'll try and make sure that we get through all of them by the time we get to the end. Craig, I'm going to ask you to go first.
There are always too many points to address in any one pithy answer. The national parks, I think, so the Common Agricultural Policy ends in 2027. And you even had Rishi Sunak on at the NFU apologizing to farmers, desperately trying to hold on to his position, apologizing to farmers. So we're really sorry, but we're now listening to you, but we're going over the cliff anyway. So, and then the nature of development inside national parks is planning plus limescale. It's everything that's difficult in planning plus limescale everywhere about, okay, we can't do this, we can't do that. So I think there needs to be an attitude in Scotland, and we're better in Scotland, to think of an agroforestry economy that builds resilient, safe civil communities at small and replicable levels. That's how I would answer that. It would require imagination from people whose day job it is to protect our national assets, and that's quite right. But an imagination to say those national assets existed before the parks and will exist long past the national parks. But what will be common is humans living and working and thriving in those spaces. So I think that the climate emergency and housing crisis requires us to decarbonize everything, head towards an agroforestry resilient community in which people choose to live in rural settings because it is the best place to bring up your children and to thrive. So I'm now just waffling a little bit there, but so yeah, how would somebody from the national parks say, we're up for it? We're going to allow 1/10 of the 10,000 homes that need to be built in rural economies, and we're going to commit to build them in national parks. So what needs to be true to make that work, and what would they look like? That would be my proposition.
Great, thank you. Niall.
Right, I think I had two. So first of all, Gail's one. So yeah, that was a really kind of point, just because we engage with Scottish Government, we engage with local authorities, we engage with all sorts of types of organisations, including development agencies and community trusts as well. And one example I always use is a local authority, central belt, but we have one officer who's in charge of alternative tenures, so anything other than social housing, and also retrofitting the entire social housing estate. And that's quite a lot of social housing estate. Meanwhile, we've got several members of Scottish Government looking at a few much smaller things, basically, let's say. And that frustrates me, because that really demonstrates the kind of wherewithal, the effort, the dedication to housing as a cause. That may not be replicated necessarily elsewhere. Now, that's not going to be slating of individuals. It might just be, this is the machine, the system, the limescale that kind of helps perpetuate this. And I think it's kind of not enough anymore. And I think with that, kind of recognizing that, and I think it goes back to kind of Chris's point about competence and confidence. It's recognizing what SG realizing what their role is. They talk about how many homes they've delivered. They haven't delivered any homes. They've given money for people to deliver homes. Now that's important. That's an important, political thing. They've got to allocate budget, et cetera, et cetera. But these things are getting more difficult over time. Do they have to adjust? I think yes, they have to focus probably more on resource spend and revenue spend, on helping more complex sites, helping people develop more complex, really just innovative models to help deliver at various different levels. And I think, is there a roaming kind of rural housing support across local authorities and communities? Potentially, yeah, because I think it's done. The second one was on planning and NPF4, which I very created sort of rod for my own back. So in terms of that, so NPF4, the ambition is there, the intent is there, and if you read through the objectives, it's all there. The problem is its implementation, and unfortunately, at the moment, what is maybe kind of being interpreted is that no development goods, development bad. It's astonishing that actually, we're in the Ecological Design Association conference, but we want to build stuff on this kind of land, but we can build it well. It's all been demonstrated, we've done it. And so I think there's a bit of really getting to grips with actually what that means. You have to consult various people, you have to consult all this, the local authorities have to do it, but get the balance right. Back to my message from before. And things like depopulation and stuff like that as well. Think about what actually you're basing your housing stuff on. For example, your housing need and demand assessment, your first port of call is the National Records of Scotland. What is that going to show for your population in rural areas? Oh, it's going down. That's not going to take into account the fact that SPEN or want to build an interconnector, doesn't take into account that offshore wind is going to be a big thing. It doesn't take into account green free ports. So how does that come into the system and what you're predicting and planning for?
Great, thank you. Ronnie.
Yeah, I'll skip past the national park discussion. I've worked in both, and there's pros and cons, but that's a complex one that would be a debate in itself. I'll go to the structure for enabling more community-led housing. The proposals that we've put forward to Scottish Futures Trust, to the likes of High and Scottish Government, is a structure whereby there's sort of regional community bodies, so likes of, for example, Northwest Sutherland, Wester Ross, Skye, Lochaber, Cairngorms, all controlling their areas under a more local authority-based board as well, so Highland, and then linking all the different local authorities in Scotland to give comfort to the likes of Scottish Government and the strategic bodies that there is a bit of coherence across the sector, if you like. But I think it's crucial that's fed up from bottom up, if you like. I don't like using that term, but from bottom up, if you like, because I think local areas know their needs and their opportunities better than anyone. And when I talk about local communities, I mean the businesses within them, the landowners, and all the community groups. So I think putting a structure in place is not difficult, and it would give strength in numbers to each of that local regions, and rather than communities having to work on their own in isolation.
Great, thank you. Morven.
Yeah, a few points from the 5 or 6 different questions there. I think as far as the national parks are concerned, and I think I come over from Lochaber, so I know that that's one of the areas that's being in consideration. I wouldn't like to go to comment too much on kind of housing policy and related to that, although I know that it can be, it's deemed to be quite challenging. I think the important thing is not to be getting to a position where we're pitting local housing needs against tourism, and how we strike a balance between these two aspects. That I fear that that's where the dialogue is going to take us over the coming months, etc., in terms of what are we wanting the local park, the national park, to be and to do. So I think that's something to think about. I think in terms of that blueprint for rural that we talked about, I think one of the things we need to get to, and we're working on this at the moment, is getting a numbers, getting a proper fix on what the actual demand is now, current, which is maybe quite invisible in some places, because some of the measurement systems are not necessarily fit for purpose in terms of how we do that. But also that future demand is getting the picture of what that economic job growth is going to deliver and to map it. So one of the exercises we're undertaking is to do a mapping of where we see that growth, whether that's in, as I say, some of the transmission work, or whether that's even in the peatland restoration jobs and all the other things that we are seeing coming at us every day. And the companies we're talking to, aquaculture, others who are saying, and hospitality, we've got so many jobs, can't get people, they can't get houses. So how do we show that on a map somewhere that makes more sense and perhaps helps to sway the degree of priority that's been placed upon rural housing? I think on the piece about, well, some of the conversations about community groups and how can we learn from each other, I think one of the things that struck me in a meeting we had yesterday with Helen and Aaron and Harris was actually, although they're all community-led worker housing, they're all made up differently in terms of the projects to some extent, and they're all seeking different routes. So it's not easy to take one and say, well, this worked here, so it will apply over there, because there's so many differences across them. And that's perhaps another strong argument for that devolution, which is, okay, just accept and trust that the community knows what it needs to do. Take away some of the barriers and the hurdles that are making it so blooming difficult for them to build it, and find a different and a better way of funding that development at that community level. That might be me. The depopulation piece, NPF4 does talk about supporting population. So I'd quite like to see explained in terms of how it can do that, be more proactive and more flexible in doing that and supporting particularly those areas. I mean, we talked about repopulation zones in various conversations we've had with government and with other areas over the last few years. So let's try something different in some of these places and see, South Uist, the picture on my slide, if we can sort something for South Uist in particular, then, let's try something different there. I might stop there, otherwise I'll go on.
Thanks, Morven. Helen.
Yeah, just to pick up on, I think it was Ewan's point about decentralisation and devolution. I'm totally agreement with that, and the impact of where you build and how many houses, whatever. But I think also, if that's going to happen, we need to maybe all think, what would the impact be at a community level? As we all say, we want devolution, but then how would that in decision making and having to make really difficult decisions, if you were suddenly as a community group or at a community council level given the power to make these decisions that at the moment are made remotely by the faceless local authority or Scottish government, it's easy to blame those, but when it's actually your neighbour, your relative, your colleague, whatever, that's making these decisions about really important aspects of your day-to-day life, then that's a real concern. So it's not to say we shouldn't do it, but it's just how would we completely turn around our entire governance of a country, which is probably needed, but how do we do it? So what's the thought process in that? No answers.
I think that's one to take to the bar, maybe. Chris.
I don't need several gens to lose my train of thought. I've been listening to everybody said, and now I can't remember what I was going to say, honestly. But
there was a question about sort of co-housing, share housing, partnerships for delivering co-housing and shared housing, and who actually needs to come together to do that, which I thought might be a good question for you.
I don't know the answer to that, because I don't know enough about the financial, legal, regulatory landscape which lies behind. I mean, I sort of see it as an architect. We have worked with scores of organizations, community-based organizations, who have tried to get things sorted in their community. That's mostly what I do actually in my day-to-day life, but they've all seemed to have different arrangements. There's different funding pots, there's different personality arrangements, there's different sort of land issues, there's different legal issues. So I don't want to sort of cop out of that, but I don't actually know the answer to how that should be arranged. What I do know is that almost every, and I'm thinking particularly community housing trusts, but community sort of facilitator company organizations that we work, people like Community Enterprise and SKS, and there's quite a lot of organizations that we work with who do the, as it were, community engagement, financial planning, understanding what the taxation of that kick would be. That stuff that is beyond me, to be honest, but everybody is working at low amounts of money being made available in strange timescales which don't suit anybody. We are all working at a daily rate, which is not what we actually want to be working at, because we're trying to make something that sounds like 15 grand work for 5.5. Actually, no, wait, 4.8, because it's including VAT. And, all of these things have, everything's a rather sort of cheap and nasty a bit, and yet the value that these organizations bring, and I include us in that in terms of how we can make rural development happen, is so high. I don't understand why something which has so many clear benefits that align with Scottish Government's aspirations is so poorly funded or supported, probably a better way of saying it.
I really like that as a closing thought, really, because this is the challenge to the government. Delivering this is meeting so many government objectives and is going to be so transformative for rural communities and rural economies and the rural future. why is it so underfunded and why is it so poorly supported, and what can be done to address that? So that's the question, really, I guess, to hand over to Donna and Annie and everyone else at Rural Housing Scotland for tomorrow and for this evening to carry on the conversation, because I'm afraid that we are going to have to draw this now to a close. And I'm sorry to those of you in the room who didn't get to ask all your questions. And I'm also sorry to everyone online who also didn't get their questions answered. But this is an ongoing conversation, so there will be plenty of chances to continue to have it in the bar this evening, at the conference tomorrow, and also online in various platforms. We've had a really inspiring conversation, and I think we've certainly identified some opportunities to take forward to the Scottish Government and to the parliamentarians. And I think we've done a great job also of laying the foundations for the rest of the Rural Housing Scotland Conference about the way in which delivering affordable rural housing is important for the wider rural economy, for securing our rural futures, and really for the very fundamental viability of sustainable communities in sparsely populated areas like where I live in Applecross. So I hope you're feeling passionate and provocative and positive to take these conversations forward this evening and tomorrow. Before I hand over to Chris Pawici for our final artistic interlude, there's a few people I need to thank. So thanks to everyone who's participated. Thanks to Morven and Helen and Ronnie, Chris, Craig and Niall. Thanks to Chris and Motte, our contributing artists. Thanks to the back of house team, Kirsten in the room, and of course, Gail, without whom none of this would have happened. And thanks to Stephen and Eleanor, who've also been online helping. And thank you to our two sound guys over in the corner who've been doing a brilliant job as well with a complicated hybrid system. Thank you to the Scottish Government who sponsored this event, and thank you to everyone who's attended, both online and in the room. So the SEDA Land has 3 more Scottish Government funded events coming up in the spring. I think they should be up on the slides right now. These are all-day events with roundtable discussions focusing on how we can bring value to the local community in the supply chains of food, timber and bioproducts. And there's more information on the SEDA website about these events, or you can speak to Gail and other SEDA staff who are here today. If you'd like to support SEDA or get more involved in what they're doing, then please become a member. SEDA are particularly looking at the moment for young volunteers to get involved. So if there's any young folk registered for the conference or participating in this event, please get in touch, come and speak to myself or Gail afterwards. So finally, Chris, I hope you're still there, and I'd like to hand over to you for your final piece.
Thanks ever so much. Yeah, I'm very much still here, and I just add my thanks and admiration for all the speakers, and just such a wonderfully informed and articulate debate. My poem is essentially about a walk. It's about a walk I might take, or any of us might take in the future. It's based slightly on the time when I worked in a hotel in rural Scotland, and it tries to look beyond just housing, but about what else about living in Aviemore in rural Scotland helps to make us human. It's based in around Aviemore. The poem's called Rothimercus. 3 hours to the next shift, and you find yourself deep among trees, miles from the kitchen's clatter and rush. December snow falls soundlessly from the dusk sky into the branches, mixing with the lichen or moss or whatever it is bearding the twigs and bark. And snow's falling onto the rough, hummocky ground between the trunks, the boulders and heather and roots, and it's settling into your hair, wetting the skin of your face, the tips of your ears, even your eyelids, for Christ's sake. Everywhere the vast, soft weight of it, as if the air itself is snow and the trees are breathing it in, breathing the silence. Snow on your lips is the taste of silence, and not a crow flaps its wings or a squirrel scurries up a branch. But what would be out anyway in this bone-freezing cold and night coming on? After all, you'll be back in the kitchen soon enough, back in the steam and the noise, peeling, chopping, stirring, earning a crust, making do, getting by, and yes, the sheer crazy buzz of the job can get the heart pumping, the blood racing, but you need out for a while, away from the heat. So here you are, an hour's walk from the hotel, from your real life, where the tourists wander in summer and the forest ends up as fodder for selfies and postcards, sunlight glittering on the trees and burns. But tourists don't know the half of it. Neither do you. The big pines loom through the snow like ragged ghosts dragging down the sky. And what have they got to do with the need to work, to pay the rent, to fill up the car? And why in hell's name are you stepping off the path? You hear stories on the news, in the papers, about people getting lost in the snow, hardly a mile from the road, lying down in the forest and giving in to the cold, dying, not getting found for weeks, if ever. So what's making you walk far into the trees, your boots sinking so deep it's like you're wading through cold waves of bracken and heather, just darkness and snow and the earth like a river under your feet, the give and tug of it, the tremble and shiver. You lean into a tree, the grey bark's wrinkled like elephant skin. Fierce air floods your throats and lungs, relentless and incredible, the surge and rush of it, while you just stand there, breathing, long and slow, letting the cold world be. And then maybe a twig creaks or a cone drops, and you know something is watching. The mind clutches at names, hare, stoat, fox, and then you see her, a haze of fur crouched on a pine root, ears pricked, the sharp glint in her eyes like starlight on granite. And God knows, she knows the weight of night and the heartbeat of mice and has no words. Her one thought is life. And you can't show this cold winter reckoning on the pay slip or balance sheet. And you can't call it a dream or luck or fate. Deep among trees, a wildcat is watching you breathe. These are the wages you get for being alive. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And that was just a brilliant way of ending this event. Thank you all again for coming and joining us in the room and online. We will be here in the room if anyone wants to come and have a chat. Donna Young from Rural Housing Scotland has also asked me to remind those of you who are registered for the conference that there will be the drinks reception starting down in the hub afterwards.
I've just spoken to her and she's extended that to the people just coming today.
Okay. Sorry, Gail, can you say that again?
Is this working? Yeah. Donna has extended the invitation to the people just coming today. I went down to speak to her. There is enough drink.
There's enough drink. Great. Okay. Well, we'll see you either here in the room or down at the hub downstairs. Thank you very much. Good night.